Trump drops names of potential vice president and cabinet contenders. Now, chat, press 1 if you suspect, whether you advocate it or not, but if you suspect that Vivek will be the VP with a strong confidence. Because I think so too. I also think it's a good idea. I think it's a perfectly fine idea because it gives us a chance to see if we can trust him. But I also suspect it's what Trump wants to do. The key consideration, President Trump said, is who would be a good president. President Trump has dropped the names of several contenders for his running mate and future cabinet members. Trump made the comments to Fox News' Maria Bartiromo in an interview that aired on Sunday Morning Futures on Feb 4th. Trump is seen by many observers as all but the presumptive Republican nominee, with back-to-back blowout wins in Iowa and New Hampshire, where he won by double-digit margins in each contest. Asked whether he would announce his running mate for his third White House bid, Trump told Mrs. Bartiromo, not for a while. Quote, I mean, we have so many great people in the Republican Party, but not for a while, he said. What criteria are you using to identify who your running mate is? Mr. Bartiromo asked. The key consideration, Trump replied, is who would be a good president. Ms. Bartiromo followed up by asking Trump point blank who he's going to choose as his vice president pick in 2024. Trump said, I have a lot of good ideas, but I haven't decided. He mentioned the names of several contenders for the number 2 position in the federal government, including Senator Tim Scott and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, both of whom would be decent picks. Tim Scott's odd, but seems to be on board, and Kristi Noem has seemed pretty good so far. 2 who have long been seen as top prospects. Other names commonly mentioned are Senator J.D. Vance, who I don't know if I've heard much about him, but I do recognize the name, and House Republican Conference Chairwoman Elise Stefanik, who I've also heard of. But President Trump specifically mentioned Mr. Scott and Miss Noem during the interview. That implies that none of those people are going to be the VP, which leaves very few people who will be. DeSantis is like a vague possibility, but it's not going to happen because of the perceived betrayal. Carrie Lake, but she's going for the Senate, and the last one, I guess, would be Vivek. There may be others I'm not thinking of, but in terms of the most prominent ones, it's those. Quote, I called Tim Scott and I said, you are a much better candidate for me than you were for yourself. That's harsh, but true. President Trump said, citing Mr. Scott's high-energy support of President Trump at several campaign stops. It wasn't it? I'm not sure why he did that. Maybe his inclusion for himself when he was on campaign is, imagine a farm in Iowa. It was that guy. And maybe he didn't care about himself. He wasn't trying to become president. He was just trying to be there so he could get on Trump's team. I think what's more likely is that he doesn't, he wants to use Trump's audience to catapult himself in popularity. And if he's boring on the stage, it doesn't go well for him. So he's decided, I have to force myself to be interesting, which is why it kind of comes across as weird. If you've seen him talk on the stage in front of Trump, it looks like he's forcing himself to be that energetic. Still, he is doing it, so fair enough to him. Mr. Scott mounted the bid for the White House last year, but dropped out after failing to gain traction in the polls. He later endorsed President Trump. I watched him in the last week defending me and sticking up for me and fighting for me, and I said, man, you're a much better person for me than you are for yourself, because for himself, he was low-key. President Trump said, for me, he's been here, he's been a real tiger, he's been incredible, he says. Still, when pressed on whether Mr. Scott would be his running mate, President Trump still said it could be a lot of people. Maybe he actually hasn't decided yet. He also mentioned Miss Noem directly. Kristi Noem has been incredible fighting for me, President Trump said. She said, I'd never run against him because I can't beat him. Which was a very nice thing to say. She said, if only DeSantis had said that. Trump answers RFK Jr. speculations. There's an interesting idea that RFK could be his VP. Probably not, but maybe. President Trump also strongly denied claims that he had considered Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be his running mate, because whilst the guy seems honest, he is also quite lefty. Mr. Kennedy, the son of former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, is currently mounting... It's more than just that. Isn't he the nephew of actual JFK? Or the grandnephew or something? Grandson, possibly? Is currently mounting an independent bid for the White House. Like President Trump, Mr. Kennedy has run an anti-establishment campaign, criticizing the existing bureaucracy and claiming himself to be the target of oppositional state actors, which I think is true. With similar themes and messaging across their campaign, the prospect of the two men teaming up has long been discussed in politics. I would like to see some sort of teaming up. Maybe not this directly, though. However, both men have on separate occasions denied the speculation, with each saying they have too many differences to effectively create a ticket. I agree. I think VP and president for those two is not a good idea. But some sort of cooperation is, especially now, because RFK could be a great spoiler candidate to take votes away from the Democrats, which is not an illegitimate thing to do in this case because it's deserved. Especially when the RFK seems to have those leftist beliefs, but also seems to be like more honest than the rest. So I would definitely take him over any of the other Democrats. Trump dismissed this as a false story, but still said, I like Mr. Kennedy a lot. Cabinet officials. During the interview, President Trump also addressed the prospect of a future cabinet and who might be involved in it. So I like how they're already asking him just questions about how he's going to form a government. It's not about Nikki Haley anymore. She's a total irrelevance at this point. But the suspicion that Vivek had, that she's only still in the race so that they can knock out Trump somehow, either by imprisoning him or killing him, and then Haley can rise as the GOP's choice, that's a possibility. You know, that narrative is possible. I don't think it'll work. I think even if the GOP, even if they put Trump in prison, the GOP aren't going to just turn around and take up Nikki, most likely. And if they do, there'll be enough people saying no that might just not work. But if they kill Trump, the GOP might try to say Haley time. Although you could also get Vivek come in and probably get a lot more votes because he'd be seen as the Trump candidate now, or even DeSantis, who both of which would be better than Nikki. But then you might also see a civil war if they kill Trump, so it might not matter what the GOP does at that point. Not sure. Some of these would be returning faces, Trump said. Is it fair to believe that you would have a number of your former officials in your new cabinet? Ms. Baratomo asked. I will put some back, Trump replied. It is a shame, and I have been disappointed about this, that there is a rift between Trump and Kayleigh McEnany, because she was brilliant as a press secretary, or whatever she was. But c'est la vie. President Trump acknowledged, as he had on other occasions, that he made some staffing mistakes during his last stint in the White House, but he dismissed the importance of these missteps. Of course, but everybody does, President Trump replied when asked about those. I can't really blame him for that. He was very new into the field, and he had to pick people that were already in DC to a large extent, already knew how it worked, or at least he perceived that he did, which I don't think is unreasonable. But I think he's learned a lot more now. And like finding anti-establishment people willing to give up their time to enter government when the establishment is that strong and angry, it's going to be tough, especially to find people that are competent enough to do it when he has no history in politics. So I can understand why not all of his picks were ideal, but he still did fairly well considering all that he had to put up with. But now probably will be even better because there's much more. He's much more experienced in politics, much more experienced with how bad the swamp is and its exact shape, and there's much more people who like him in and around politics as well, so it should be easier. As on other occasions, he emphasized that he was an outsider to Washington in 2016, forcing him to rely on advice from people who didn't have his best interests at heart, indeed. Now Trump said, I know people who I didn't know before. I know now the smart ones. I know the dumb ones. I know the weak ones and the strong ones, which is truer than it was before, but never be so confident as to think it's complete. Though I doubt he does, he's just saying. Regarding a potential returning figure, Trump was demure. Asked about the prospect of former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making a return, Trump said, I don't know. I thought Pompeo was, like, the few things I saw from him were smart. Like, I saw a speech he gave years ago about how China bad. So maybe he's good. He was also asked about former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, who President Trump praised as fantastic. He also said that Mr. Ratcliffe has done a great job. Trump added that Dr. Ben Carson, former head of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, has also done a great job. He was running against Trump in 2016, and he was the really soft-spoken black guy. And he was he seemed fairly competent, not very inspiring as a leader, but fairly competent as a person. So he wouldn't be too bad. So you're expecting to be in your cabinet? Ms. Baratomo asked. Some of them, Trump replied. I mean, if someone did a good job, I would do that. Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, won't be making a return if Trump is re-elected, he also suggested, because he's going to burn the Federal Reserve to the ground. That part's not in the article, but, you know, many people in chat, I think, would prefer that. I doubt he will make major changes, says Lemon. The keys in power, at least in my view, are not willing to make major changes. At the very least, Trump won't be a puppet president. I think he would, actually. Last time, it may have been difficult to perceive the changes he made, I think because they were mostly changes in the interest of long-term benefit, which were then immediately removed by Biden in the beginning of the next term. So what Trump did was not necessarily like big, bombastic, instant election-winning changes, which unfortunately you've kind of demonstrated may be why politicians seek short-term change rather than long-term improvements. I think most of what Trump did was long-term benefit stuff, which of course was then, as I said, instantly revoked by Biden as soon as he got into office, because they were actually good ideas that were simple and obvious. So do not underestimate Trump. And furthermore, Trump is more attuned, I think, now than he was back then. I think he can do more to help now than he could back then. So I would not only not be pessimistic about Trump, I'd be actually very optimistic about the potential. Trump did not become a dictator like some people in Cabal wanted, Corinne, Well, I don't know. The whole dictator on day one thing is pretty common for presidents, but Trump has now acknowledged that that is the case. So maybe he will do even more. Maybe he will do more short-term stuff. Trump needs to get more bills through Congress instead of EOs. That would be ideal, yes, but unfortunately, the thing is, Meat Bun, EOs, executive orders, shouldn't be used too liberally. However, there are actually good reasons to use them today. What they were originally intended for emergencies, there are plenty of those today. So I think what he should do is use the executive orders for those and then find some way to say executive orders are now illegal and can never have an effect. Some way of doing that. And it seems like pulling up the ladder, but I think it's the right thing to do. And then everything else should go through Congress. There may be some way that you could implement a policy that has some strong restrictions to prevent it from being used in situations other than genuine emergencies, where you could then still use it, but you'd have to have more than just the president's say-so for that, I think. Yeah, so I guess you could have, like, if you implement an executive order and then Congress doesn't pass it, that's not good, and that's something about that is bad. I don't know what would happen as a result, but it's kind of like it's kind of like what I say in Cabal, like, don't give someone a role unless you're sure they deserve it, because taking it away is a lot worse than not giving it. Similar thing there. It's like they're trying to make a way to implement policy immediately so that Congress does not have to discuss it first. But if you need it to happen immediately, then you can't really retract it, and you can't really like say that was wrong. You can't do that. It won't actually happen in practice. Once it's implemented, it's implemented. It's also like the idea of if you try and do an early release of a video game, like a preview release of a video game, that is your launch. Regardless whether you're saying it is or not, it doesn't matter what color you put on the Steam store page. It doesn't matter whether you put in bright letters, this is a pre-release. That's your launch. Because that's when people notice it, that's when people give attention to it, and people won't give attention to it again until it significantly changes. That is your launch. So make sure it's good when you launch it. Similar here. Make sure that, like, when you send it out, you don't get to change, you don't get to retract it easily. Or at least if the president doesn't want to, it won't be retracted easily. So make sure it's right before you send it out. But of course, that conflicts with the preference of needing it immediately. So perhaps what you could say is that executive orders always have a time limit of like 2 months or something, so they cannot be applied after that. And renewing it requires congressional approval. You could do something like that. First day in office, new executive order, disregard all executive orders. Government proceeds to 404. Yeah, no, something like that. Yeah, executive order that just says, or like. Maybe even a constitutional amendment or something, get all the states to agree to it, to just no executive orders anymore. Not sure they would agree to that, but something that prevents it from being legitimate. Some policy change that prevents it from happening in future. Or, as I said, makes it explicitly temporary. Now, some of those executive orders might be for something that doesn't really make sense to be a time-sensitive thing. And there's a separate thing you've got to deal with individually. A law where it has expiration date unless they pass by Congress. I mean, that's kind of what I just suggested, by the way, yeah. Not sure. Actually, I think I said it after you said that, but I didn't see you'd wrote that. Matthias says that would infringe on the president's constitutional power as head of the executive branch. You would need an amendment. Yeah, maybe so. I'm not sure that the executive orders, though, are part of his instantiated constitutional power, though I think it was added later. Is it actually just a convention? In which case, just end the convention. Anyway, let's move on.